There's a file in Singapore with your father's name on it. The retired Admiral told me at my father's graveside. Go to the address on this card. Tell them who you are. They'll know what to do. I remember the cold more than anything else. It was January in Arlington, and the kind of cold that doesn't just chill you, it settles into your chest and stays. The flags along the rows of white stones stood stiff in the wind. My father's flag had just been folded and handed to me, crisp corners, no ceremony wasted. There were maybe 6 people total. A chaplain, 2 men I didn't recognize in dark wool coats standing near the back. My brother, Philip, on my left, hands in his pockets, already looking at his phone. And the Admiral. I hadn't noticed him at first. He was standing slightly apart from the others, the way people do when they've attended too many of these to need to be directed. He was tall, maybe late 60s, silver-haired, with a kind of posture that doesn't come from the gym. When the chaplain finished, most people drifted toward the parking lot without saying much. The Admiral walked toward me. He didn't introduce himself by rank. I only figured that out later, when I looked up the small gold pin on his lapel. Your father was a remarkable man, he said. More than you know. That phrase should have felt like a compliment. It didn't. It felt like a door cracking open that I hadn't known was closed. He handed me the card. One side had an address in Singapore, printed in small, clean font. The other had a phone number and 2 words written in ink. Ask for Nora. What is this? I asked. It's what he set up, the Admiral said. He wanted you to have it. Before I could ask a single follow-up question, he shook my hand and walked away. I stood on the frozen grass in the January cold, holding a card I didn't understand, watching a man I'd never met disappear between the headstones. My father was a retired Green Beret, warrant officer, 2nd class. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, a handful of other deployments he never named. He lived in Roanoke, Virginia, in the same house he'd bought when I was 4 years old. Brown shutters. A fig tree in the backyard he watered obsessively every summer. He drove a truck that was older than my graduate degree. When I was growing up, he was not the kind of father who came to every soccer game or helped with homework over the kitchen table. He was present in a different way. He fixed things when they broke. He paid the bills before they were due. He never raised his voice. He taught me how to check my tire pressure and how to read a lease agreement before I signed one, and when I moved to Atlanta for my first real job, he drove the 12 hours himself, refused to let me help carry boxes, and then drove back home the same day. He didn't talk about his service. Ever. I stopped asking sometime around high school. When he died, a stroke, sudden, at 61, the neighbour across the street found him. She'd noticed his truck hadn't moved in 2 days. I was in a meeting when my phone rang, and I didn't recognise the area code, so I let it go to voicemail. I listened to it in the parking garage afterwards, sitting in my car with the engine running for 20 minutes before I could bring myself to drive. Philip called that evening. He's 5 years older than me and lives in Charlotte. He called before I'd even finished making arrangements. I talked to the attorney's office, he said. Dad didn't have much, as far as I can tell. House, the truck, some savings. Philip, he just died this morning. I know, I'm just saying. We should get ahead of it. There was a tone in his voice I recognized. Not grief exactly. Calculation. After the burial, I went back to my father's house alone. It smelled the way it always had. Pine cleaner and something faintly metallic, like tools. His reading glasses were on the kitchen counter. His calendar on the wall still showed December. I stood in the doorway of his bedroom for a long time without going in. I looked at the card again. It didn't make any sense. My father had never mentioned Singapore. He'd never mentioned international anything, as far as I knew. His passport, as far as I knew, was in a drawer somewhere, expired and unused. Except when I went to find it, to bring it to the attorney's office with the other documents. It wasn't expired. It wasn't expired. It was current. And it was full. Singapore, Thailand, Germany, the UK, entries going back 9 years, stamps I had never seen, from trips he had never mentioned. I sat on the edge of his bed and turned the pages slowly. The dates didn't line up with anything I remembered. I would have been in college for some of them, working in Atlanta for others. I thought he'd spent those years working at the hardware store and watching Braves games on Sunday afternoons. Philip texted that night, "Any idea what assets there are? I'm asking for logistical reasons." I set my phone face down on the nightstand. The next morning, I called the number on the card. A woman answered after 2 rings. Her English was precise and calm. "Meridian Private," she said. I told her my father's name. There was a pause, not a confused pause. A waiting one. "Yes," she said. "We've been expecting someone to call. Are you the daughter?" "I am." "When you travel, please bring your identification and a copy of the death certificate. Ask for Nora at the reception desk." She didn't explain what Meridian Private was. She didn't tell me what to expect. She said when, not if. And then she said, "I'm sorry for your loss," and ended the call in the way that people do when they've had this conversation before. I booked a flight to Singapore 3 days later. I didn't tell Philip. The morning before I left, Philip drove up from Charlotte. He didn't call ahead. He had a key from years ago and used it, and I heard the door open while I was in the kitchen. He looked around my father's living room the way you look around a hotel room, quickly, assessingly, and then he sat down at the kitchen table and folded his hands like we were about to negotiate. "I've been going over the estate paperwork," he said. "The house appraised for about 310. That's before you factor in what repairs it needs. I know what it's worth, Philip. I'm just saying if we sell it quickly, we avoid a loss of overhead. He died 11 days ago." Philip exhaled through his nose. "I'm not trying to be callous. I'm trying to be practical. Dad always said that, right? Be practical." "He did say that." I didn't respond. "Is there anything else?" he asked. "Any accounts I should know about?" He had that savings, and I think there was a brokerage account he set up in 2014. I haven't gone through everything. That was true. It was also not the whole truth. Philip stayed for 2 hours. He helped himself to coffee and walked through the house twice, and when he left, he hugged me in the thin way he'd always hugged me. One hand, shoulder only. "Just keep me looped in," he said. I nodded. After his taillights disappeared down the street, I finished packing. I want to tell you that Singapore felt glamorous, or at least cinematic. It didn't. It felt efficient, clean in a way that makes you feel slightly watched. The airport was enormous and quiet. The cab from Changi was air-conditioned down to 68 degrees, despite it being 90 outside, and the driver asked me twice if I needed a jacket. I didn't sleep on the flight. I spent 9 hours reading through what I could find about Meridian Private on my laptop, which wasn't much. A registered address, a minimal website, the phrase discreet wealth stewardship appearing 3 times. The building was in the Marina Bay area. Not flashy, not minimalist in the way that suggests ego. Just stone and glass with a small brass plate beside the door and a reception desk staffed by a woman with reading glasses and a calm so practiced it felt architectural. "I'm here to see Nora," I said. "My father's name is—" I gave it. She nodded once, made a call, and within 2 minutes a woman appeared from a side corridor. Mid-40s, dark blazer, the kind of handshake that tells you someone was trained to put people at ease. "I'm Nora," she said. "Thank you for coming. I know this trip wasn't easy." She led me down a corridor that smelled faintly of paper and something woody, cedar, maybe, and into a private office with a round table and a window that looked out at the bay. "Your father was a careful man," she said once we'd sat down. "He was also a generous one." She opened a folder. The first document had his signature on it. I recognized it immediately. Slightly left-leaning, the W of his first name looking just like it did on every birthday card he'd ever signed. "Love, Dad." "He established a trust structure here in 2011, Nora said. "He selected Singapore for its legal framework and its stability. He funded it consistently over 12 years. I stared at the numbers. They were not enormous, not the kind of wealth that makes headlines, but they were substantial. More substantial than anything I'd ever associated with the man who bought generic brand cereal and patched his own work boots with electrical tape. "What was it for?" I asked. Nora folded her hands. "He designated it to support a network of individuals, former service members, primarily, some with injuries that fell outside VA coverage. some with families in acute financial difficulty. He also built in a family provision, structured disbursements, not unconditional. I sat back. He never said a word, I said. Not once. No, she said. He was specific about that. He said, and I'm paraphrasing from his instruction letter, that if people knew the money existed, the relationships around it would change. Money changes what people are willing to say. I thought of Philip's voice on the phone the morning after our father died. I'm just saying we should get ahead of it. How much? I asked. Nora slid a summary sheet across the table. The total trust valuation was just over $9 million. The room went very quiet. He lived in the same house for 27 years, I said. Yes. He drove a 2008 truck. He declined 3 opportunities to withdraw personal funds, she said. He was consistent. That word settled into me the way certain words do when they're exactly right. Consistent. My whole life I had watched him be exactly that, present in small ways, predictable in the best sense, and I had never once thought to call it a strategy. Nora slid one more envelope across the table, cream-coloured. My name written on the front in my father's handwriting. He asked that this be given to you in person, she said. After everything else. I didn't open it right away. I held it through the meeting, through the taxi back to the hotel, through sitting on the edge of the bed staring at the harbour lights outside my window. I ordered room service and didn't eat it. I watched the cursor blink on my open laptop, and then I opened the envelope. The paper was thick. His handwriting was the same as always. Deliberate, block style, no loops. If you're reading this, I didn't get to explain it the way I wanted to. So here's what I need you to know. I was not good at saying things out loud. You know that. Your mother knew it too before she left, and she was right to call it a flaw. But I was good at doing things. That's the only version of saying something I ever really trusted. When I came home from my last deployment, I met men who didn't come home the same. Not dead, just different. Broken in ways the government didn't have a form for. I had what I needed. I had the house, the job at the store, enough to live on without worrying. They didn't. It seemed wrong to not do something about that when I could, so I did something about it. Quietly. The way I do everything. I'm leaving you in charge of continuing it because you're the one who showed up. Not because Philip didn't love me, he did, in his way. But showing up is a kind of answer I needed to see before I handed something this important to someone. The trust is not yours to spend, it's yours to protect. There's a provision in it for family if you need it, and Philip is not excluded. But there are conditions. I put them there deliberately. You'll understand why. Don't let resentment drive the decisions. That one's for both of you. I love you. I was proud of you the whole time. I just didn't know how to say it without making it weird. Dad, I read it twice. Then I set it on the nightstand, turned off the lamp, and lay in the dark, listening to the hum of the city 17 floors below. I didn't sleep much. But when I finally did, it was the first night in 2 weeks I didn't dream about his voicemail. Philip called the next morning before I'd even had coffee. I need to know what's happening with the estate, he said. The attorney's office said you haven't returned their call. I've been travelling. For what? I had to meet with someone about Dad's affairs. Silence. What does that mean? What affairs? He had a hardware store job and a truck. It's more complicated than that. How complicated? I stood at the hotel window looking at the marina. I had been awake for most of the night deciding exactly how much to say, and when, and how. There's a trust, I said. Dad set it up a long time ago. Another silence. Longer this time. How much? He asked. His voice had shifted into something I recognized from every time money came up with Philip, a tightening, an alertness. I'm still reviewing the structure, but there's money. There's a trust. Yes, it has conditions. Conditions. He said it flatly. What kind of conditions? It supports veterans and their families. There's also a family provision, but it's structured, not a simple disbursement. Is there a number? I told him. He was quiet for 6 seconds. I counted. $9 million, he said, and he never told us. No. That's, he stopped. Start hard again. That's not right. He borrowed money from me in 2016. Did you know that? For the roof. Said he was tight. I gave him $8,000. I hadn't known that. I'm sorry. You're sorry. His voice went hard. He had $9 million sitting in a bank in Singapore, and he asked me for $8,000 for the roof. It wasn't sitting there, it was structured. It was designated. For strangers. For people he served with. The line was quiet for a moment. When Philip spoke again, his tone had gone to somewhere colder and more formal. I'm going to talk to an attorney. That's your right. Don't make decisions about that money without me. The trust has a trustee, I said. That's me. Dad appointed me. He hung up before I could say anything else. I flew home 3 days later. Philip filed for a formal accounting of the estate within 2 weeks. He hired an attorney out of Charlotte, a man named Grant, who sent letters with a lot of underlining. The claim was that our father had failed to disclose the Singapore Trust as an estate asset under Virginia law, and that as a co-heir, Philip was entitled to a proportional share. There was also language about potential undue influence, the suggestion that someone had guided our father's decisions in a way that was financially harmful to his heirs. That part stung. My father had made every one of those decisions himself, in a foreign country, over 12 years, with careful documentation and legal representation on 2 continents. The idea that someone had manipulated him was absurd to anyone who had known him for longer than 5 minutes. He was the least manipulable person I had ever met. He once stood in a car dealership for 2 hours rather than accept a price he thought was inflated. I hired my own attorney, a woman in Roanoke named Vivienne Cross, who had a measured way of speaking and a reputation for not losing trust litigation. She reviewed everything over 3 days and called me on a Tuesday evening. Your father was thorough, she said. This is going to be fine. How fine? The trust predates any relevant claim by over a decade. It was properly disclosed in his will, referenced, not itemized, which is standard. There's no evidence of external influence. The trustee designation was executed correctly. Philip is going to make this ugly, I said. He's going to make it procedural, she said. There's a difference. The first hearing was in a courtroom in Norfolk that smelled like floor wax and old coffee, beige walls, fluorescent lights, a judge named Beaumont who wore reading glasses on a chain and didn't seem impressed by anyone. Philip sat at the opposite table with Grant, who had a lot of hair gel and talked fast. Vivienne talked slowly, on purpose. The judge asked questions. Vivienne answered them. Grant raised objections. The judge noted them and moved on. At the end of 40 minutes, a follow-up hearing was scheduled, and everyone stood up and filed out. Outside on the courthouse steps, Philip found me before I could get to my car. You know you don't have to do this, he said. I know. Just split it. It would be over in a week. It's not mine to split. It's $9 million, he said. Nobody would miss a few million going to family. I thought of the letter. The trust is not yours to spend. It's yours to protect. Dad would know, I said. Philip looked at me like I'd said something childish. Dad is gone. I know, I said. That doesn't change what he would know. He shook his head and walked away. The second hearing brought more documentation. Nora sent certified records from Singapore, a full accounting of every contribution my father had made to the trust, every disbursement, the investment history, the oversight reports, a decade of records, immaculate and dull. Grant tried to imply the records were incomplete. Vivienne introduced the audit trail. The judge looked at it for a while and asked Grant if he had anything to add. He didn't, really. At the third hearing, the Admiral appeared. He came quietly, the way he had at the graveside. He took a seat in the gallery without making a production of it, and when Vivienne called him as a witness, he walked to the stand the same way I imagined he walked into every room, unhurried, like he'd already decided what he was going to say and saw no reason to be anxious about it. He stated his name and his retired rank, Vice Admiral, United States Navy, and confirmed that he had known my father for over 20 years. He was one of the most disciplined men I have ever served alongside, he said. His decision to establish that trust was entirely his own. He discussed it with me in general terms. He asked for no guidance. He simply informed me, the way he did most things, as a statement of fact. Grant tried to suggest that the Admiral's relationship with my father constituted a conflict of interest, that the Admiral had somehow steered the trust toward military beneficiaries for his own purposes. The Admiral looked at him the way you look at a smoke alarm that's going off for no reason. Your father steered his own resources, he said. I was a bystander. The judge recessed for 20 minutes. When she came back, she adjusted her glasses and looked at the paperwork for a moment before speaking. The trust is valid, she said. It predates the decedent's death by over a decade. There is no evidence of undue influence. The petitioner's claim is dismissed. Not a gavel slam, not a speech. Just dismissed, the way you close a cabinet. Outside, Philip was standing by his car with his jacket zipped up and his hands in his pockets. He looked tired. Not the calculating tired from before. Just tired. You really weren't going to give, he said. No. He looked at the pavement. I gave him $8,000 for that roof. I know he could have just told me that he had it handled, that he was saving it for something, anything. He didn't think you'd understand the plan, I said. I don't think he thought I would either until I did. Philip was quiet for a moment. The veteran stuff, he said. How many people does it actually help? Right now, 11 families are receiving some form of ongoing support. Medical expenses, mostly. One woman's kids are in college. A man in Ohio kept his house because of a mortgage payment. Philip rubbed the back of his neck. He really never spent any of it on himself, he said. He fixed his own boots, I said. He bought generic cereal. Something shifted in his face then, not softening exactly. More like recognition. I called him an ATM once, Philip said quietly. Years ago, I was angry about something. I said he only helped people because it made him feel superior. He stopped. I don't think I ever apologized for that. He didn't hold on to things, I said. You don't know that. No, I admitted. But I don't think he did. He drove away without saying goodbye, which was better than the alternatives. 3 weeks after the ruling, I drove to Charlotte. Philip opened the door before I knocked. His apartment was nicer than I remembered. Clean, organised, a bookshelf he'd clearly put thought into. He'd made coffee, which meant he'd been expecting me even though I hadn't said I was coming. We sat at his kitchen table. I'm not here to lecture you, I said. Okay. And I'm not here to gloat. I didn't think you were. I put a folder on the table between us. Dad built a family provision into the trust. It's a structured disbursement, not a lump sum. There's a process, financial counselling, documented progress, annual review. Philip lit to the folder without touching it. He knew I'd need it, he asked. He planned for the possibility. That's different. Is it? He picked up the folder, turned it over once, set it down. I'm not good at being managed, he said. I know. I'm serious. I don't want someone reviewing my bank statements. It's a third party, I said. Not me. And it's voluntary. You can say no. He was quiet for a moment. Why are you doing this? He asked. After everything I did. The lawsuit. All of it. Because Dad didn't build in a provision for strangers, I said. He built it in for family. That means he thought about you, specifically. And whatever he thought, it wasn't that you didn't matter. Philip looked out the window. When he looked back, his eyes were glassy in the way that comes just before someone decides not to cry. He never said he was proud of me, he said. He never said it to me either. You got chosen as trustee. That's not the same as proud, I said. He trusted as trustee. That's not the same as proud, I said. He trusted me with a responsibility. That's a different thing. We sat there for a while without talking. Outside, someone was mowing a lawn. It was a Sunday, and it felt like a Sunday, slow and a little raw. He agreed to look at the folder. That was all, for then. A year later, we went back to Arlington together, not because anything required it, just because it felt like the kind of thing you do. The headstone was the same as the day he was buried. Plain, exact, his name and rank and dates. No flourish. He wouldn't have wanted any. Philip stood with his hands in his pockets. He'd sold his car, paid down 2 credit cards, Met with the financial counselor 8 times. He sent me updates monthly. A brief email, usually 2 or 3 sentences. He'd started cooking at home. Small things. I used to drive by here and not stop, he said. After Mum's funeral, every time I was in the area. I didn't know that. It felt like stopping meant something I wasn't ready to mean. I didn't ask what he meant. Some things don't need unpacking. He was building that whole time, Philip said, and none of us knew. I think that was the point. He nodded slowly. We stood there until the wind picked up and the flags along the rows began to move. You ever wonder if it was worth it, Philip said, keeping it together. All the legal stuff, everything. No, I said. Not once. Not about the trust, I said. About other things, but not that. He was quiet for a moment. You sound like him. I know. We drove back separately the way we'd come. On the highway heading south toward Roanoke, I turned off the radio and drove in silence for a while. I thought about the card the Admiral had handed me in the January cold. I thought about Nora's office in Singapore, and the harbour outside the window, and the way my father's handwriting had looked on that cream-coloured envelope, deliberate and familiar. He had lived a small life on purpose. He had kept things quiet on purpose. He had handed me something that would take the rest of my working years to steward correctly, and he had done it without fanfare, without a speech, without once asking me if I was ready. He knew I would be. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the trust. Not the $9 million, not the legal fight, or the Admiral, or the Singapore bank with the brass plate and the calm receptionist. What I keep coming back to is the fact that he knew, and he waited. There's a line from his letter I think about when things get complicated, when a disbursement is contested, or a family's situation is harder to assess than it looked on paper. When I'm sitting at my own kitchen table at 10 at night with a spreadsheet open and a cold cup of coffee beside me, I was proud of you the whole time. I just didn't know how to say it without making it weird. I think about that and I keep going. If you have someone in your life who shows up quietly, who fixes things instead of talking about them, who's there in the small ways when the big ways aren't available, I hope you'll think about them today. Call them if you can. Thank them even if the thank you is clumsy, even if they shrug it off. And if you're carrying something heavy on your own right now, something you haven't told anyone because you don't want to change how they see you, know that the people who love you are usually further ahead than you think. They're just waiting for you to figure it out. If that kind of story stays with you, I'd be glad if you stayed with this channel. Leave a comment and tell me about someone in your life who lives steady. I read every one. I've thought a lot about the sequence of it. Not just what happened, but why it went the way it did. My father didn't stumble into $9 million. He built it, deliberately, over 12 years while driving the same truck and buying store-brand groceries and telling nobody. He made that choice not once but thousands of times. Every time he could have withdrawn funds and didn't. Every time he could have said something and chose not to. That kind of consistency doesn't happen by accident. It happens because someone has decided, deeply and without fanfare, what they're actually for. And then there's Philip. I don't think my brother is a bad person. I've never thought that. But I watched what happened to him the moment a number entered the conversation. $9 million landed between us and everything shifted. His posture, his tone, the questions he asked and the ones he didn't. He wasn't pretending. That's the thing that struck me most. He genuinely believed he was owed something, and that belief had been sitting in him long before that phone call, waiting for a reason to surface. The lawsuit wasn't really about the trust. It was about years of feeling like he'd come in second, like our father had quietly preferred me, like he'd been on the outside of something he couldn't name. The money just gave all of that a shape. What I'd come to understand is that cause and effect in families works slowly. My father spent decades building something, not just the trust, but a way of being, steady, consistent, present in the small ways when the big gestures weren't available. And because he lived that way, he earned a kind of trust from me that was never transactional, never spoken, never obvious. I showed up on Sundays not because I expected anything. I showed up because he was my father, And that's what you do when you love someone and you're paying attention. That choice, made over and over, quietly, for years, is exactly why he handed me the responsibility he did. He wasn't rewarding me. He was recognizing a pattern he'd watched long enough to believe in. Philip's pattern was different. Not worse, necessarily, just different. And his consequences were different too. Not punishment, just outcome. What I want to say, and what I think my father was trying to say through the trust itself, is that integrity isn't a grand gesture. It's the accumulation of small ones. It's paying the bills before they're due. It's driving 12 hours to help someone move, and then driving back the same day. It's setting money aside for strangers who are struggling month after month, without telling anyone, because it's the right thing to do, and you don't need an audience to do the right thing. My father never lectured me about any of this. He never sat me down and explained his philosophy. He just lived it, and I watched, and somewhere along the way I absorbed more than I realized. I think about that now when the decisions get hard, when I'm reviewing disbursement requests at 10 at night, or navigating something complicated with Philip's counsellor. I think, what would the consistent choice be? Not the easy one, not the dramatic one, the consistent one. That's what he left me. Not the money, the standard,